Hi, Dr. Weisslogel here. Here's a brief presentation about some uh, interesting ideas that Aristotle has about us and how it is best for us human beings to be and what kind of a thing we are and what is our goal and our purpose in life. So let's talk about this a little bit. Most of this material is being drawn from the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics, from chapter 1 all the way through chapter 13. So in this presentation, we're going to do a little bit of reviewing. We're going to review the four causes. That's the summary of Aristotle's metaphysical view of the nature of reality. We'll talk about that and review that a little bit. Then we will also determine, what does Aristotle mean by happiness? He says if you ask anyone on the street, what would you like to be? What would you most like to be? The answer is always some version of, well, I'd like to be happy. But what does happiness mean? For Aristotle, happiness means something quite specific. And then we need to look at the structure of the human soul. What is it that we are? Well, we're a soul, according to Aristotle, a soul of a certain sort, and we need to take a look at that structure, the metaphysical structure of that soul, and see what that's all about, and see if there's any clues there to help us understand how it might be best for us to be. And then when we take a look at that soul, we'll see that our soul is capable of a wide variety of functions or activities. We need to take a look at those activities and see if there's any of those activities that is very characteristic or most essential of what it means to be a human person. That's going to be the way we find out what Aristotle really means by human happiness. And that highest function will be determined by that nature of the soul. Okay, so a review of the four causes. The formal cause. Aristotle is saying for anything to be real, it has to be a function of four causes, or four becauses. A thing is real because it is a kind of a thing. In other words, there can't be a real thing that's not some kind of a thing. You may not know what kind of a thing is, but if it's a real thing, it is some kind of a thing, on Aristotle's way of looking at it, and that's what he means by the formal cause of a thing. Also, every real thing, as far as we know, must be made of something. In other words, real things have a material cause. You can't imagine a real basketball or a real coffee cup made of nothing whatsoever. All things that are real also have an efficient cause, that which brings a thing into being or into existence. In order to really understand something, we have to understand the efficient cause, first the proximate efficient cause, the immediate cause that brought it into existence, but to truly understand it, we have to understand what brought into existence that proximate cause, that cause just before the thing we're interested in came into existence. So, for instance, if we talk about a coffee cup, well, we need to understand that it was made by a coffee cup factory. But somebody made the factory, somebody made the machinery, somebody got the materials, the raw materials, and formed them into some kind of shape that could be used to make coffee cups, and so on and so forth. So to understand anything fully and completely, you need to understand the entire chain of efficient causality. And finally, there's the final cause, what a thing is for, the thing's end or aim or goal or purpose. Again, according to Aristotle, there can be no real things that lack such a final cause. All things are for some reason or for some purpose. So there's some way that they're meant to be, or something that they're meant to, so to speak, achieve. In class, we may have discussed this. The Greek word for this is telos, T-E-L-O-S, and a kind of thinking that explains whatever you're interested in terms of its final cause, in terms of purposes, is known as teleology, not theology, teleology. So, for instance, little kids are great teleologists. If you ask them why it rains, they usually answer something like, so the grass can grow. That's not what we learn in meteorology class today. We learn that it rains because of evaporation and condensation and gravity and various atmospheric pressures and so on and so forth. We don't talk about the purpose of rain in understanding why it rains. We think about the mechanics and the efficient causality, let's say, of why it rains. But a teleological approach always explains things in terms of its purposes, and Aristotle is a teleological thinker. So for us human beings, our formal cause, we're human beings. We participate in the form humanity. But immediately there's a question, what is that form? What does that form mean? What does it mean to be a participant in that form? What are the characteristics or criteria for something to be a participant in the form humanity? We need to discuss that. But that's our formal cause. We're human beings. That's the kind of thing that we are. Also, our material causes skin and muscle and bones and organ tissue and water and a variety of chemicals and in our cells and in our neurological makeup and so forth. All of that makes us human. Without that, without those material elements, whatever else we'd be, we would not be a human being. Our efficient cause, of course, our parents. But as we said, to really understand us and where we came from, we have to understand that great chain of efficient causality, our grandparents and our great grandparents and so on. That's in effect what we're doing in many ways with the study of evolution. Where do we come from? What is that long line that brought us down to today and how we are existing today? And of course, our final cause, which Aristotle says is happiness. But again, what does that word mean? People say it, they'd like to be happy, happiness is our goal, but exactly what does it mean to be happy? So these are the questions. What is happiness? And what is a human being? What does it mean to be a certain form in certain materials? What does that mean for us? Well, Aristotle begins by, as he often does, by observation, by investigation of the world around him. He asked around, in what does happiness consist? What makes people finally and fully happy? And he was able to determine that, in general, there are a finite number of forms of life. What I mean by a form of life is just simple. It's an answer to a question: what is life all about? What does it really all boil down to? And some say life boils down to the pursuit of pleasure. Life is about seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Others say, no, life is about seeking honor. Others say, no, life is about making money. And some might say that life is about a study or contemplation. And I put those words in quotes just to let you know that I'm not sure those are the best English translations for what we're getting at here. But let's look at this. A life of pleasure. That's a reasonable response to the question life is all about. I mean, isn't that how it is with us? Do we not try to seek those things that are pleasurable, that please us? And do we not overall try to avoid the things that bring us pain or displeasure? Now, of course, we make decisions to accept some temporary, limited amount of pain in the pursuit of some higher pleasure. We have jobs and we go to the dentist and the doctor and we do those kinds of things that may not be the most pleasurable things at every moment, but we realize that overall they will lead to more pleasure than they will pain, and so we choose them. So maybe that's what life is all about. Maybe it really is about seeking pleasure. Now, for Aristotle, as we learned in the Nicomachean Ethics, he says very famously that a human being is a political animal by nature. Born for citizenship, our translation puts it, but we are a kind of animal, kind of living thing that's meant for political life together, for communal life together. That word polis, politics, comes from the Greek word polis, which just means city, not Polish, polis, which means the city. We are city dwellers. We live together in community. And so those who know how it is best for us to live together in community would be among us the most honorable persons. So if knowing how to live together well is the most important kind of knowledge, and Aristotle says that it is, political science, the knowledge of how it is best to live together, he said, is the most important science. Well, anyone who would possess that knowledge and act accordingly to make our communal life together better would be worthy of honor. And those who work against that, worthy of the dishonor that falls upon them. So maybe seeking honor in political life is the most important kind of life that human beings can engage in. Similarly, we're taught to be a little suspicious of someone who says life is all about making money. However, what are your prospects for happiness if you have no money whatsoever, if you have no means of making money? Because it's not the money necessarily that's important to us, but that which the money can secure for us. Food, clothing, shelter, entertainment, art, and various pleasures. Money is not unimportant. So perhaps those who say that what life boils down to for human beings is making money, well, maybe they have something there. And then finally, there's this idea that, well, perhaps the life of study or contemplation. Now, those words, study and contemplation, are translating a single Greek word. Translators have some disagreement about how we should understand that. But and Aristotle doesn't say very much about this in Book 1, about what he's talking about here. And we will definitely get back to this later in our discussion of his thought. But just so you know, I don't think by study he means the highest form of life is to be a professor at a university. And I don't think he means by contemplation that the highest form of life is to be some kind of monk or religious mystic. If study and contemplation signify those kind of things to you, I think that's off track. I know that's not really what Aristotle has in mind. But what exactly he has in mind, we'll have to return to later. So so Aristotle sums up and says, I think these are the general forms of life that people engage in based upon what they think life is all about. Pleasure or honor or money making or something like study or contemplation. Well, how are we going to know? How are we going to know if one of those forms of life is the most important form of life and so the most conducive to our fulfillment, to our happiness? Well, we're going to need some criteria. We have to understand that, like happiness, the form of life we engage in, the goal of that form of life, have to synchronize with how happiness is for us. So we know that happiness is desired for its own sake. We learned that early on. We desire to be happy, not in order to get some additional thing, but simply to be happy. It's desired for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else. So these various forms of life should also aim at something that we desire for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else. Similarly, all the other choices and activities and things that we engage in life must be desired ultimately for happiness or for this thing in a form of life that we think is the most important thing. So all things must be desired ultimately for the sake of this final cause of us, and the final cause is not desired for the sake of anything else, but just for its own sake. The final cause, this thing we desire for its own sake, in effect orders all of the other choices and actions we engage in the course of our lives. We take classes, we get jobs, we marry, we divorce, we do whatever we do for some immediate goods, but also ultimately to make us happy. Also, Aristotle says happiness is self-sufficient. And let me remind you that by self-sufficient, he doesn't mean in order for you to be happy, you need to be self-sufficient, because he already told us you are not self-sufficient. He said you are a political animal. You were born for citizenship. You're made. The kind of thing that you are is a communal thing. You need other people. You didn't make the clothing on your back. You didn't probably build your own house or your own car. You didn't print your own books or copy them out yourselves. You didn't grow your own food this morning for your morning's breakfast. You're not self-sufficient. I am not self-sufficient. None of us are self-sufficient in that sense. Not only do we need each other, but we need the world around us. We need the air that we breathe, the water that we drink. We can't live, let alone be happy, without these other things. We're not self-sufficient in that sense. However, what Aristotle is saying here by self-sufficient, that happiness is self-sufficient, he means that it comes from yourself. It comes from within. The happiness doesn't need any externals to make it real happiness. And that's a little hard to completely understand, but it's got to be something that you possess. Another way of putting it is your happiness is not in the hands of others. Others contribute a lot to our lives, and we need them in our lives. But ultimately, happiness is not in the hands of others, but in our own hands in a way. That's what he means. And happiness must be complete, again, in the sense that not that you will never need another thing after attaining happiness. You will eventually get hungry again. You're going to need to continue to breathe. You're going to need companionship and work and others to cooperate with in your life. But the happiness, should you attain to that state, will cover all of the other things, will make all of the other things be right for you, what's good for you. It's an overarching thing, happiness. And happiness must be eternal. I think this is controversial. He says that it's almost impossible to lose. It'd be very difficult to lose happiness once you attain to that state. But if he's right about this, we need to take that into consideration. Happiness has to be the kind of state, kind of way we are, that when we get there, it's not going to go away. It's not going to change. So let's review these different forms of life we talked about and see if they meet the criteria. For instance, if life is all about seeking pleasure, it should satisfy all these requirements. So, is pleasure desired for its own sake and not for the sake of anything else? Now think about it. I think the answer is yes. Even if other things follow from doing pleasant things, the pleasure of the things that we do or the choices that we make are desirable in and of themselves. So I would have to say, yes, check. That's okay. We met that criterion. How about this? Is everything else that we do desired ultimately for pleasure? Well, I desire to go to the dentist to get my teeth fixed so that I have healthy teeth, but also to avoid further pain from diseased teeth and to increase my overall pleasure of having healthy teeth and gums. So I'm going to have to give him this one too. It seems reasonable to think that everything we do is desired ultimately to increase our pleasure and reduce our pain. But what about this? Is it self-sufficient? No, I don't think so, because all the things that give us pleasure are external to us. And if they happen to be withdrawn, the pleasure would go away. If I have pleasure in having a full stomach and I'm deprived of food, that pleasure will go away. It's my feeling of pleasure of being satisfied, my hunger being satisfied, is not within myself. I need to go get food in order for that to happen. Further, I don't think it's complete for the same reasons, that we're always going to need to seek further pleasure and to avoid further pains if that's what we think our life is about. And clearly, it's not eternal. Pleasure can be easily lost. You know that. Even the things that we find very pleasurable, if we were to have them in excessive amounts, the pleasure that we would normally get from a nice back scratch or a good meal, if we were to gorge ourselves or to have that back scratch not stop at any time, eventually the pleasure would go away and it would even become painful. So pleasure is not the highest form of life, according to Aristotle. Let me quickly say that he thinks pleasure is important. Pleasures and pains are ways of teaching us how we're doing as we go through our lives. The pleasurable things, for the most part, are good for us, at least to a certain extent. Maybe not absolutely, but to a certain extent. And the things that are painful are warning signs that something has gone wrong for us, something is not working out for us. So pleasure and pain, seeking pleasure, trying to avoid pains, is important for us to do. It's an important part of life. Aristotle is simply saying that there's more to life than seeking pleasure and avoiding pain. Well, what about the life of seeking honor? He speaks in glowing terms of political life, the extreme importance of political science, of knowing how it is best for us to live together. Would we desire honor for its own sake? I think that we could. Would the desire for honor, could it order all of our other choices? Perhaps, maybe, I'm not so 100% sure. Does it order my desire which breakfast cereal to have? I'm not sure. So maybe not. I don't think all of our other choices are desired for political ends. I think we have a private life, and those choices are not all based on our desire for political honor. It's not self-sufficient, obviously, because honor comes from other people. In our political life today, politicians seek the honor of being elected. They seek the honor of your vote. And they are bound by that fact that the honor has to come from us, from the electorate. So if this is what life is all about, it can't be the ultimate expression of happiness because it's in the hands of other people. It's also not complete in that same way, and clearly you can lose elections. It's not eternal, right? So as important as political science is, as important as our ability to live well together is, seeking honor in and of itself, as important as it is not the ultimate meaning of life. Well, what about money making? Well, we see immediately that life cannot be about money making, even though it's important for a happy human life, a fulfilled and good human life, to have funds, to have sources of money for the things, not for itself, but for the things it needs. And that's immediately why we have to cross out the first criterion. It's not desired for its own sake. We don't just wallow in our big piles of money. No, money is for buying things. It's for getting the stuff that we need. Are all other things desired for money? No, it's just the opposite. Whenever we desire money, it's because we desire other things. Clearly, it's not self-sufficient. It's outside of us. Money comes and goes. It's certainly not eternal. You could be robbed. Look at the last financial crisis. If you base your life solely on trying to have as much money as you can, you will not be living the highest human life, even though making money is an important part of a human life. Well, what about study or contemplation? Well, he doesn't give us enough to go on in the first book of the Nicomachean Ethics, so we're going to have to wait and see what that is later on in the course. Okay, so happiness. What is it? Give us a definition. And Aristotle, after doing a variety of noodling, thinking about all the different ins and outs of what constitutes a happy life, he finally settles on a definition that would meet the criteria. Happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if there is more than one, in accordance with the highest. Memorize this definition. Happiness is an activity of the soul, your kind of soul, in accordance with virtue. Now, virtue here simply means excellence, to do something as well as something can be done. We might think of the word virtue as being sort of Victorian or maybe prudish in certain ways, a person of virtue. We shouldn't, but virtue is not just a word that applies to the moral realm. If you could play the cello very well, you have the virtues of a cellist. You have all the excellences necessary to be a good cellist. Okay, so we're looking for activity of our soul, and that activity is being performed or functioning with virtue, with excellence. And if there's more than one what? More than one activity, and so more than one way to do things well, we have to try to find what the highest is. The highest. And what does Aristotle mean by the highest? If we have a lot of different activities, how will I know which one is the highest one? Okay. But this definition, happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue, and if there's more than one in accordance with the highest, will meet all of the criteria that we saw before. And happiness, we immediately learn then, cannot be a feeling or an emotion which comes and goes, but it's an activity. It's not something you feel. That's the way we're used to speaking in ordinary life, that I feel happy. Aristotle wants you to stop talking like that. He wants you to start to see happiness as an activity of your soul. It is something you do, or better, even something that you are. You have to be a certain way to be happy, not just feel certain things. Feelings and emotions come and go by design, if I could put it that way. Your feelings and your emotions, just like your sense of pleasure and your sense of pain, those feelings and emotions are there to help you. They're there to help you navigate your life. If something sad happens and you don't feel sad, there's probably something wrong with you. If something delightful happens and you don't feel delight, there's something amiss in you, and you need to look at that. Your feelings and emotions can tell you a lot about how the world is and how you're doing in that world. But they change. They're not eternal. If you only had a happy mood, a happy feeling, I shouldn't say happy, I should say a pleasant feeling, a sort of a giddy feeling, a la 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 feeling. If you had that constantly, no matter what happened in your life, we would very much worry about you. Okay? Your feelings are meant to change. They're meant to come and go. But happiness, true happiness, is not a feeling. Okay? I shouldn't have said feel happy. When you are happy, that is going to be permanent. Aristotle says. Permanent, even with your changing emotions, even with your experiences of pleasure and pain in a normal human life. Okay. But what is the activity? What is this act? What are our activities? And if there's more than one, is there a highest one? Okay. The Greek word ergon, be a nice name for somebody, wouldn't it? Right. The Greek word ergon it gets translated as function or work. A human being, we'll see shortly, has many functions. I mean, you know this. We have many functional capacities. There's many activities, many different types of activities that we can engage in the course of our life. And Aristotle thinks we have sort of an overarching activity. Think of it as a life's work. So we use that word work, for instance. I go to work. I go to my job. I go to labor. Okay, there's a variety of ways one can labor or one can work like that. But when we go to a museum, let's say, and we look at the work of a great painter or the life's work of a great painter, we're not seeing all the labor, we're seeing the results of that labor. We're seeing, in effect, what that painter's life as a painter was all about. So we have that sense of our work, and we need to understand, not just as painters or as teachers or as soldiers or as doctors or the variety of things that we might do in our labor in life, but we need to know across the board as human beings, do we have a life's work? What is that? If we can learn what those functions are, then we can learn how it is best for these functions to be functioning, and then we will be able to see in what happiness really consists for us human beings. Well, the human soul. According to Aristotle, our soul, that's the thing that we are, can be considered in terms of two general kinds of functioning. We have rational functions and we have non-rational functions. Now, by non-rational, I want to distinguish from our sort of common sense, common way of speaking when we call something irrational. Sometimes even the translations into English say that we have rational functions and irrational functions. But that word has a negative connotation for us, irrational. When somebody's behaving irrationally, we're saying they're not being sensible, they're being stubborn, they're not being cooperative, they're not seeing things the way everybody else sees them. That's not what Aristotle means by non-rational functions. If you think for the moment that rational functions are about our conscious thinking about things, then non-rational functions are things that we do or things that go on within us that do not rely primarily on thinking for them to happen. That's the difference between thinking and non-thinking functions. We could say that for the time being. That's the distinction. So it's not between we have functions that make sense and then we have functions that don't make sense. That's not correct. We have functions that are a result of the fact that we can think, and we have a number of functions that go on that don't require our thinking to function the way they do. Aristotle calls these two parts of the soul, that we have a rational part and a non-rational part, but he himself is quick to say don't think of them as parts in the sense that you could take these parts apart and maybe put them back together again. Don't think of them as, for us, like as if they were car parts. They're not parts like that. Aristotle says think of them as two aspects like concave and convex. Right? In concave and convex, you can't say, well, give me the concave but not the convex. It's two sides of the same coin. Give me the one side of the coin but not the other. Now, you could talk about the concave aspects of a thing and not the convex. Or you could talk about the convex things and not the concave, but you're not going to have them separately. You could talk about the head side of the coin. You could talk about the tail side of the coin, but you're not going to have a coin that's only one-sided. That you can't have. So they're not parts like that. They're aspects of our soul, based on the basic kind of functionings that they engage in. All right, well, let's graphically lay this out. We have rational functions and we have non-rational functions. Now let's take a look at the non-rational functions first. Aristotle says we can divide our non-rational functions into two subcategories of functionings. He says, first of all, we have what he calls vegetative or nutritive functions. These functions are like the fact that we grow, the fact that our cells regenerate, the fact that our heart beats and our lung breathes and our body digests and our hair grows and our fingernails grow. We blink. A wide variety of functions that go on with us. And Aristotle calls them non-rational, not because they're crazy or they don't make any sense. He calls them non-rationals because you don't have to think about them. Imagine having to go through your day thinking blink, blink. It'd be hard to think about anything else. So fortunately for us, a lot of these functions are non-rational. We don't have to think about them in order for them to happen. And further, if we did think about them, it wouldn't do much good. I've looked in the mirror many times and looked at my top of my head and tried to think my hair into growing back, but it won't grow back. It's a non-rational function. It does not respond to thinking one way or another. And these kind of functions, not exactly the same function, but the same types of function, for instance, growth, we share with plants and non-human animals, other animals. Living things have these kind of non-rational functions, or they're not living. If you found something that had no functioning whatsoever, well, whatever else you'd have there, it wouldn't be a living thing at all. So living things have non-rational functions. That's part of the definition of what it means to be a living thing. And we share similar types of functions both with plants and with other non-human animals. There's also a second category of non-rational functions that Aristotle calls our appetites and our desires. Now, they're non-rational in this sense, that your appetites and your desires, for instance, your hunger, your fatigue, your desire for sex and learning and companionship and friendship and entertainment, a wide variety of very basic desires and maybe more sophisticated desires, those desires arise in you. We for instance, if we feel attracted to someone else, we have the phrase, well, we fall in love, or I fell for her or him. Well, no one plans to fall. You don't say, oh, tomorrow, this morning about 10, I'm going to fall. It just happens to us. That's how appetites and desires work. We don't have to think up our hunger. We just get hungry. We don't have to think about, hey, I haven't been tired in a while. When you get tired, your body will let you know that you're tired. So they're non-rational, again, not because they don't make sense or there's something strange or weird about them. Not at all. They're very important for us, but they do not have their origin in rationality, in thought. And these kind of functions, well, we don't share them with plants. Plants don't have hunger or fatigue. Fatigue, as far as we know, and it's not the way we think about them. They're not conscious beings. But with sentient animals, with non-human animals, my cat gets hungry and tired, and it likes to play. It has a number of desires. So we share appetites and desires with other non-human animals. Now, all of these functions are extremely important for us. Now, we're on the trail of trying to find out what are our functions, what are our activities, and if there's a highest activity, that's going to be what happiness is all about for us. But all of the activities, all of them, highest ones to the lowest ones, from the most sophisticated to the most basic, all of our functions matter to us. All of them are important for a human life. If you were to be born and immediately cease to grow, your chances for happiness are nil. If your heart ceases to beat, that's it for your opportunities for living a happy human life. So they're very important functions. Don't misunderstand Aristotle when he says perhaps that maybe heartbeat, however important it is not the most important human function. Don't think that he's saying it doesn't matter if your heart beats, but it matters. If you never felt hunger, if you never desired to learn, your chances for happiness are diminished, if not exterminated. You no longer would have any opportunity for full happiness. But Aristotle may say that these functions, however important they are not the highest functions for a human person. We'll have to see. All right. Now, over on the rational side of things, the rational aspect of things, again, we can sort of divide our rational functions into two groups. Now, the division is done differently here. On the non-rational side, the vegetative and nutritive functions were distinguished from the appetites and desires by this. The vegetative and nutritive functions have no interaction with rationality whatsoever. They just happen to us, like it or not, and lucky that they do. Appetites and desires, well, you know how it is with your hunger. You feel hunger, but then you have to do something about it. Your hunger doesn't get satisfied automatically. Your blood needs to course through your veins, and your heart beats automatically. Takes care of the need. Well, when you get hungry, when you have that need, it doesn't automatically take care of itself. You have to do something about it. And on the rational side, it's not a division uh, made like that. It's based on the object of our thinking. It's based on what do we think about. Rational function, in a sense, there's just one functioning. It's a kind of thinking. It's this thinking. But you can divide what you think about, Aristotle says, into two groups. One of the groups is thinking about changing things, and the other would be thinking about unchanging things, thinking about things that don't change. That's the distinction. So the changing things, well, everything around us in some ways is changing. The weather changes, our circumstances changes, our own appetites and desires change all the time. We're not always hungry, we're not always tired, we're not always sexually aroused, we don't always want to learn, we don't always want to play, although we like playing. All of the aspects of our life seem to be in constant motion, in constant change. The pre-Socratic philosopher Heraclitus said famously, you can't step twice into the same river. And what he meant by that is things constantly change. They're always changing. And we, as rational beings, as beings with the ability to think, to be conscious, but not just conscious, but think about our circumstances, can think about the changing world without and the changing world within. We can think about that. Well, Aristotle also says that there are unchanging things, and at first that's a little bit puzzling. I mean, what things don't change? Even if you say, well, I take the same route to work every day, that doesn't change. Well, in an abstract sense, you take the same route to work, but every day is different. The weather on those roads are different. What you ate for breakfast is different, and that's affecting your ability to drive. What's on the radio may be interesting or boring. There may be more or less traffic. A pothole might have developed. There could have been an accident. There's so many things going on that's in constant motion, constant change when you're taking that quote-unquote same route, that it'd be hard to say it's exactly the same. It's not exactly the same. So what could there be? Well, Aristotle identifies three areas, three kinds of things that we can think about that are unchanging. I think we need to understand this a little bit. He identifies the truths of mathematics. Well, that's easy. 2 plus 3 equals 5. Always. Always did, always will. It's never changed. It's never going to change. It's true for you, true for me, true for anybody who ever lived on the planet, true for anyone who ever will live on the planet. That's how mathematics works. So the truths of mathematics are unchanging. The answer is always there. He also says the truths of science never change. Now, that should strike you as quite controversial, because you'll know from your study of the sciences that our science has changed a lot since the time of Aristotle. For the most part, we no longer even practice Aristotelian kind of science. We practice modern science. It's different. We'll say more about that as time goes on. But, it used to be scientific fact, if you will, that the Earth was in the center of the entire universe. And now we know that the Earth is not even the center of the solar system. It's a solar system. The sun is in the center of that system. And our solar system is not in the center of the universe. It's on the outskirts of the Milky Way galaxy, which is on the edges of the known universe, and so forth. So isn't it true that our science changes all the time? Well, if you're talking about the story of science, if you're talking about the history of science, about what we know, not about what is, which is the object of science, but we start talking about us and what we know about what is, well, that changes all the time. We learn all the time. Our knowledge, that's all science is, an organized body of knowledge, well, that's constantly changing. That's constantly being tweaked and added to, and sometimes completely flipped upside down and revolutionarily changed. What we know about what is in the world constantly changes. Absolutely right. However, I don't know if you thought about it this way, but it better be the case that the way things are doesn't change. Otherwise, the goal of science, to have an organized body of knowledge, is a waste of time. What I mean by that is this. If whatever causes some object dropped from my hand to fall to the ground, if the reason that happens were to be constantly changing, it would be different from day to day, from moment to moment, than to say I have knowledge about why something falls from my hand to the ground is meaningless. I don't have any knowledge of that if it's constantly changing. I might be able to say this is what did it today, but who knows what's going to do it tomorrow. So I don't know why things fall out of my hand. I don't know anything unless there's a pattern, unless there's a way it is such that if you drop something out of my hand, it'll fall. And it explains exceptions like, well, if I drop something from the sky, it falls unless it's an airplane going really fast that's built a certain way. Then it doesn't seem to fall. It's because I know how that patterns are that I can make it be the case that I could put something up in the air that's not going to fall down, at least not fall down right away. It's an important idea. We must have the presumption that the world is a certain way that doesn't change. Because if we didn't have that presumption, then our desire to find out the way the world is in vain. Now you say, well, wait a minute, I'm not sure I understand that. Doesn't the weather, the way things are, change all the time? Doesn't it constantly change? That's the way the world is. It's constantly changing. Again, I want to say that if there's to be a science of meteorology, there must be the presumption that there is a pattern, a way weather, however complicated it is, there must be a way that it works. That the way that it works is not constantly changing. The manifestation of the weather, the way the weather is for us today, that changes, but the mechanism by which it changes doesn't change. And we want to know that mechanism. The problem is it is an incredibly complicated mechanism and we haven't figured it out. But if we didn't believe there were such a mechanism, if we didn't believe there was a way that the world is, we would never even engage in science. So when Aristotle says that the truths of science don't change, he doesn't mean what we know about science doesn't change. That changes all the time as we get better and better and smarter about the way the world is. But he believes that the goal of our scientific endeavors has to be something unchanging. I think he has a good point there. And then finally, the truths of metaphysics. Not just the truths about the physical world, but the truths about the structure behind even the physical world. What makes things things and what makes existence exist. Well, those truths have to be unchanging. And right in front of you on the screen, you have an example of that which, according to Aristotle, does not change. This structure of the human soul that I'm showing you here in this presentation is a structure that has always applied to every human that has ever lived, according to Aristotle, and every human that ever could possibly live, according to Aristotle. There are no humans lacking vegetative and nutritive functions. There are no humans lacking appetites and desires. There are no humans lacking the ability to think, at least in principle. It could be damaged, but they're human because, at least in principle, they're the kind of thing that should be able to think in ordinary circumstances. It is not a physics, so what Aristotle knew about cell regeneration and digestion, or how the mechanisms of hunger and fatigue work, what he knew about them, well, he doesn't know what we know about those things. He doesn't know what modern biology and anatomy knows about those things. And how appetites and desires and vegetative and nutritive functions happen, for instance, heartbeat, physically could change. My heart beats on its own, but I could get a disease and somebody could put a pacemaker inside of me to make my heart beat in a different way. But if I didn't have a heartbeat at all, my human being days are over. Okay, so physically these things, there may be multiple ways physically that these things could happen. Even our thinking. Well, we have brain cells. Maybe we could replace those with silicon chips or something like that. But if you couldn't think anymore, whatever you would be no longer the kind of human being that we're all aware of. So the truths of metaphysics, the truths of science, and the truth of mathematics don't change. Now, the ability to think about unchanging things we would share. So I think this is not Aristotle's way of putting it, but I'm inferring. We would share this capacity if there were purely rational beings. I don't know if there are any purely rational beings. We are not a purely rational being because we have other functions that are non-rational. So we're clearly not purely rational beings. But if there were angels, if there's a God that's a rational being, then angels and God should be able to sort of grasp these unchanging truths, just like we could. But this necessity, capacity and necessity to think about changing things, well, that seems to be uniquely human. We don't share it with animals. We don't share it with plants. We don't share it with angels and God, mainly because angels and God, if there are such things, don't get hungry. They don't get tired. They don't need to learn anything because they know everything. They've seen the forms, if we were speaking of Plato. But for us, this seems to be something that's uniquely human in us. Well, let's look at this a little bit more. So focus on this. Animals have appetites, non-human animals have appetites and desires. Human beings not only have appetites and desires, but we can think about them. We think about how to satisfy them. Animals, in the sense that Aristotle means, we don't think about how to satisfy them. They just satisfy them. We call that instinct. We say that non-human animals, when they get hungry, they instinctively know how to go about getting food. Or at least they instinctively know how to teach their young how to find food without having to think about it, so to speak. I'm not sure Aristotle and other philosophers are 100% fair to non-human animals. I'm not sure if this is the exact line that divides human animals from all non-human animals. I think it divides us from some non-human animals, maybe most non-human animals, but I'm not sure that there aren't some non-human but higher animals, so to speak, that don't have a little bit of rational functioning. I don't know, but Aristotle didn't think so. So let's not argue over that for the moment. Let's just understand what he's saying. On the one hand, like animals, we have appetites and desires. They're non-rational in the sense that they simply happen to us. But unlike non-human animals, we are able to think about our own appetites and desires and decide what to do with them. And that interplay between having appetites and desires and thinking about changing things puts us in what I'll call the sphere of morality. The only moral beings that there can be would have to have this structure to their selves, to the way that they are. They need things that they don't have, and they can think about ways to secure the things that they need but don't have. And because they can think about various options for satisfying, say, their hunger or their desire for sexual activity or for fame or for respect, because there are multiple ways they can go about trying to get what it is they need, we can praise and blame them for what they do. And when you're talking about praise and blame, you're talking about morals. So when a shark gets hungry and eats a swimmer, we don't say, oh, what an immoral shark that was. There were plenty of other options that shark should have just known better than to satisfy his hunger in such a selfish and inconsiderate way to that swimmer. We don't say things like that. But if a human being were to get hungry and just walk over to somebody else's plate and grab their food off the plate and start eating it, we would say, wow, that's not the best way to satisfy your own hunger, I don't think, in usual cases. We would blame them for a poor choice in having this in the way they opted to satisfy their desires. So the only moral beings there can be have to be built like this. Sharks are not moral beings because they can't think about what they do. Angels, and perhaps even God, might not be considered moral beings because there's nothing that they need to do, and so no way to do it incorrectly. There's in a way nothing that they do. They just sort of see how things are. That's the kind of discussion that tends to be above my pay grade. But there is in our religious literature this understanding that when we shake our fists at God for why did you do things this way, it's the presumption that God had some needs and thought it over how to satisfy his own needs or her own needs, and made bad choices. And that's our personifying the world around us, personifying the divinity in a certain way. And I don't know if Job in the Bible thought that was the best way to think about it, and I don't know that Aristotle does, and I don't know that I do as well. But I do know this: moral beings have to have these two capacities, these two sets of functionality. They need things that they don't currently have, and they also need to be able to think them over and make choices about how to secure those things, and they can do that securing of the things they need either well or poorly. And that's what we mean by morality. So what are the lessons so far? Happiness is an activity of the soul in accordance with virtue or excellence. And if there's more than one activity, and so more than one virtue or excellence, then happiness is in accordance with the highest one. The human soul has four general categories of activity. We have our vegetative nutritive activities, functions. We have our appetites and desires. We have our activities of thinking about the changing world within and without. And we have the activity of thinking about unchanging things. We need, therefore, to find out which of these is the highest category of activities out of these four. Right? These are categories, so at least we could say, well, the activity we're looking for is in one of these four categories, and which is the highest category. Okay. Now, let's say a little bit more about what Aristotle might mean by highest. It's the type of activity that's most characteristic of a human being, that human beings have and other beings don't. It's the essential type of activity, that without which whatever you have in front of you would not even be a human being if it couldn't engage in this activity, at least in principle. It's the kind that distinguishes humans from any other kind of being whatsoever. Right? It will be a type of activity that meets those criteria that we discussed for our final cause. Happiness. It will be an activity that's desired for its own sake, not for the sake of anything else. It's an activity that all other activities are aimed at this, being able to do this activity. It's self-sufficient, it's complete, and it's in its own way eternal. Could it be the vegetative nutritive category of functions? Well, no, of course not. It can't be that which distinguishes us as humans, because plants and animals have certain kind of growth functions, for instance. So even though they're extremely important, it's not what distinguishes us from all other beings. You can't say, oh, the most important thing about us is cell growth because cells grow in plants and other non-human animals. How about having appetites and desires? Again, no. Other animals have appetites and desires, like the shark we were talking about, or squirrels, and this is not what distinguishes us from human beings. But remember, having appetite and desires is very important for human life, and we could never do without them. Aristotle's just trying to say that, having hunger or fatigue or even the desire to know in and of itself is not the highest activities. What about our rational functions, the activity of our thinking? Could that be the highest category? Well, okay, it's as a collective category, it's extremely important. It does distinguish us from other beings. Plants have no rational functions. Non-human animals, at least according to Aristotle, have no rational functions whatever. But remember, there are two general categories of rational functions: the activity of thinking about things that change and the activity of thinking about things that do not change. Is one of these categories higher, in the sense that we just talked about, more essential, more unique to us human beings than any other? The activity of thinking about things that change, could that be it? Well, it is the property, in conjunction with our having appetites and desires, that makes us moral beings. And as I said a few minutes ago, plants aren't moral beings, non-human animals aren't moral beings, and if there are such things, purely rational beings, because they have no needs that have to be satisfied, they can't be moral beings either. So it is distinctive of us. Maybe we found what we're looking for. And by moral being, let me just say that I am not complimenting you if I describe you as a moral being. I'm not giving you a compliment. I am simply objectively describing you. You're the kind of being that's open to praise or blame for your choices. When I say a shark is not a moral being, I'm not criticizing the shark. I am, again, simply describing the kind of being a shark is. It is not open to praise or blame for its actions. It just does what it does, and it is what it is. But for you and for me, we're moral beings in the sense that we could do things well and so be praised for our actions, or we could do things poorly and be blamed and criticized for our choices. And so no other beings we know of are moral beings. But the question is this the very highest activity of the human soul? That's a good question, because it seems to me, on first glance, maybe we've found what we're looking for. We are finding the most characteristic, distinguishing set of functions or activities that we engage in, are choosing how we're going to satisfy our appetites and desires. Well, for next time, then we're going to have to take up the question of our rational functions as they deal with our own changing appetites and desires in an ever-changing world. And our goal is going to learn about moral virtue. We're going to learn about excellence in making those choices and decisions and actions to satisfy our own appetites and desires, and so to be more worthy of praise than to be deserving of blame. And we'll find in the end whether or not this set of functions or activities are the highest things for human beings. Talk to you next time.